Three men, posing as HOA officers, kicked in the door of Detective Mark O'Brien's home, threatening his son and demanding fake compliance. They'd been terrorizing families for weeks, extorting money, faking authority, even threatening deportation. But they picked the wrong house, because this time, the homeowner was a real cop. Just wait until you see how this twisted scheme unraveled and how justice came crashing down in the end. Mark O'Brien hadn't taken a real day off in months, not the kind where your phone's dead on purpose, the badge is locked in a drawer, and your only plan is couch, greasy pizza, and a rerun your teenage son's too polite to call lame. 41 years old, hardened detective out of Harris County. But right now, he looked more like a dad on autopilot. Barefoot, faded jeans, and a high school t-shirt from a team that hadn't won since '98. It was just after 7 when the door shook like someone was trying to kick it off the hinges. Not a knock, a pounding, animalistic, urgent. Mark was halfway through a slice when it happened. Both he and his son, Robbie, froze mid-bite. "HOA, security, open up!" The voice was deep, theatrical, a kind of forced authority that instantly set off every instinct Mark had honed over 2 decades of chasing the worst Texas had to offer. But before he could even get to his feet, the front door exploded inward, splinters flying, the chain lock snapping like a twig. The room erupted into chaos. 3 men stormed in, uniforms, sort of, cheap black polos with HOA enforcement stitched in all caps, like someone had ordered them online. Not tactical, not regulation, not right. They moved with aggression, but not the kind that comes from training. This was brute confidence, reckless and desperate. One grabbed Robbie and shoved him against the wall hard enough to knock a family photo to the floor. Another was already in Mark's face, grabbing his collar and slamming him backward into the arm of the couch. The third stood near the door, hand resting on a holstered pistol that didn't look standard issue. "You violated Section 5B of the community guidelines," the one in charge barked. His voice was thick with fake authority, like he'd practiced it in a mirror. "You're coming with us." Mark didn't resist. Not yet. His eyes darted once to his son, making sure the kid was still breathing, still standing. Robbie's face was pale. He wasn't hurt, just frozen. Good. Still time. Mark's breathing slowed. He knew the type. These weren't real officers. Real officers don't kick down doors for neighborhood complaints. They don't scream community code violations like they're felony warrants. And they definitely don't touch kids. These guys, they were playing dress-up with a crowbar, but Mark also knew this game could turn bloody in seconds. One twitch, one mistake. So he didn't twitch, didn't make a mistake. Not yet. He kept his voice calm, level, low. "You're making a mistake," the one gripping his shirt sneered. "No, sir, you made the mistake. Unauthorized modifications, unauthorized antenna, HOA rules are HOA law." Robbie shifted near the hallway, trying to disappear. Mark saw the way the man at the door kept glancing toward the bedrooms, like maybe he was thinking about where valuables might be, like maybe this wasn't about rules at all. Mark could feel it. They weren't just bluffing, they were hunting. But he wasn't prey. Not tonight. He let his body go limp, let the man think he'd won. And as soon as his son made it out of sight, down the hallway and into his room, Mark's mind shifted. No more playing dumb. No more pretending to be just a tired dad on a couch. Now, he was exactly who they didn't want him to be. He was the law, and these clowns had just kicked in the wrong damn door. The men didn't just barge in, they spread like termites. One peeled off down the hallway with a swagger that screamed ownership. Another headed straight for the living room shelves, yanking open drawers like he had a warrant signed by God himself. The third, the one with the beard and the oversized ego, hovered near the dining table, flipping through mail and swiping it onto the floor when it didn't interest him. It was all theater, loud, messy, and pointless. Mark sat still on the couch, his chest tight, his jaw clenched so hard it pulsed in his temple. His hands stayed where they were, pressed lightly to his knees, not out of fear, but calculation. Every second was a test. Every second they stayed in that house, something darker was crawling to the surface. The man who'd stomped toward the hallway came back holding a box, Robbie's medical kit. Not the first aid type, the important one. Allergy EpiPens, glucose strips, seizure medication, insurance files. He flipped the lid with the back of his hand, stared blankly at the contents like he couldn't read any of it, then dumped the entire box onto the rug like trash. "What the hell is this? Where's the paperwork for your antenna?" he barked, pointing to absolutely nothing. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the mess. His eyes were fixed on the bearded one now crouching by the thermostat, muttering to himself. "You got an unauthorized installation," Beard shouted without turning around. "Violation of HOA visual standards. Section 3A of Neighborhood Code. It's an eyesore. Where's your variance paperwork, huh? You got it or not?" Mark said nothing. His voice would have come out too quiet or too calm or too deadly. He wasn't ready to speak yet, because if he spoke now, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be war. The hallway behind him creaked. Robbie had come out of his room, just a step or two, barefoot on the floorboards, enough to see past the wall, enough to lock eyes with his father, and then with the man holding the spilled medication like it was evidence of some crime. Robbie's face changed slowly. Confusion gave way to fear, then a quiet, gutting realization that something was deeply, dangerously wrong. His bottom lip trembled. He backed up a step. A sob caught in his throat. He tried to hold it in. He failed. Mark heard the sound, barely more than a gasp, but it hit him like a fist. His son, crying, scared, watching his father pinned down by cowards in costume, watching strangers throw away his medicine like it was junk mail. The man nearest Mark leaned in, gripping his collar tighter. The smell of stale sweat and beer thick in the air. Mark could see it now. Dilated pupils, twitchy fingers, the buzz of a man too high on power and too low on sense. Still, Mark didn't move, but something inside him cracked, not like glass, like tectonic plates, silently, irreversibly. They weren't looking for antenna documents. That had never been the point. There were no HOA violations, no legal reason to be in this house. These men weren't regulators, they weren't inspectors, and they sure as hell weren't officers. They were scavengers, looking for something. Money, drugs, leverage, or maybe just the thrill of seeing a family cower. Mark had seen it before. Different zip codes, same sickness. When fear wears a badge it doesn't deserve. He looked back at Robbie. The kid was gone from view now, disappeared down the hallway, probably hiding behind the bedroom door. But Mark could still hear that breathless sob, still feel the shape of it hanging in the air like smoke. That was it. The line had been crossed. Not when they broke the door, not when they put hands on him, not even when they threw medical files across the floor like garbage. It was when they made his son feel powerless in his own home. Mark O'Brien had spent years learning how to stay calm under fire, how to control a scene, how to wait. But now he understood. His silence wasn't protecting anyone. It wasn't strategy anymore. It was permission. And that permission just got revoked. Mark had been silent long enough. The room was thick with the noise of drawers slamming, footsteps pounding, the rustle of papers ripped from folders, and the occasional barked command from the bearded one, still ranting about antennas like this was a zoning tribunal instead of a felony in progress. Mark's breath came steady. His mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. He moved slowly, deliberately, as he rose from the couch, like a man who wasn't in a rush because he already knew how this would end. His body was loose, his voice calm, not loud, not angry, just final. "I'm going to make you an offer," he said. That made them pause, not stop, not freeze, just pause. Enough to glance his way, a moment of curiosity threading through their arrogance. "You leave now," Mark continued, leveling his eyes at each of them. "Walk out that door, and nobody goes to prison tonight." For a beat, no one spoke. Then came the laugh. It was sharp and cruel, as if the idea itself was insulting. The guy nearest the door, broad chest, slick hair, the kind who thought muscles were a personality, chuckled loud enough to fill the room. Then he turned and spat on Mark's floor like it belonged to him. "You serious?" he sneered. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Mark didn't blink. He bent slightly, reached beneath the edge of the couch cushion, and pulled out a worn black leather case. One movement, smooth, controlled. The room went quiet the second he flipped it open. The badge caught the light. "Detective Mark O'Brien," he said, voice like gravel over steel, "Harris County PD, Fraud and Financial Crimes Division." The name hit like a gunshot. He held the badge steady, watching their faces. "You boys just made a real mess," Mark continued. "Armed home invasion, assaulting a minor, illegal impersonation of a public officer, theft of medical records, civil rights violations. That's before we even talk about the extortion attempts." They didn't laugh this time. The bearded one, loudest of the group until 2 seconds ago, took half a step back. His face had lost all color. His lips moved like he was trying to find a word, any word, but none came. The guy who spit turned stiff, jaw clenching, like it would hold his brain together. And the third, youngest, tattoo on the neck, confidence now draining fast, was already eyeing the door like it might vanish if he didn't run soon. Mark let the moment hang, let the weight of what they'd done sink in. Because now, finally, they understood. They hadn't kicked in the door of some scared homeowner with a TV too big for the HOA board's liking. They'd broken into the house of a cop, not just any cop, a fraud detective, a man trained to dismantle scams, expose fake credentials, unravel criminal cover stories like theirs, a man who didn't need backup to make them bleed legally. "I gave you a chance," Mark said, still holding the badge in front of him. "Now I'm taking it back." The silence in the room was suffocating. He watched the shift, the flicker of realization across their faces, the moment that boldness collapsed into panic, the second the predators knew they'd misjudged their prey. And now, it was too late. The tension broke like glass. One of the fake officers, neck tattoo, still half a kid under the bravado, bolted for the door without a word, flight over fight. He didn't even look back, just made a break for it, shoulder checking a lamp on his way out, sending it crashing to the floor. The second one wasn't so smart. Beard twitched. His hand jerked toward his waistband, fast, practiced, dirty. Mark saw the movement before it finished. Years of muscle memory fired like a switch. Mark struck without hesitation. He stepped in, twisted, and drove his elbow deep into the man's ribs, hard enough to empty the air from his lungs. Beard doubled over with a grunt, and in the same motion, Mark caught his wrist mid-draw, twisted it backward at an angle no wrist is built for, and yanked. The pistol clattered to the floor. Beard hit the carpet 2 seconds later, face first, arm pinned behind his back, groaning into the fibers. "Don't move," Mark growled, already reaching for the zip ties he kept in the side table drawer. Not protocol, just habit. Across the hallway, Robbie had come out again, this time not in fear, but with the phone already to his ear. "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" "My dad's a cop," Robbie said, voice shaking but steady. 3 men broke in. "He's got them down, send units, real ones." The dispatcher asked for the address. Robbie rattled it off without missing a beat. Mark looked over and nodded once. That was all the confirmation the kid needed. Within 5 minutes, the neighborhood turned into a scene out of a movie. Sirens echoed off the cul-de-sac. Red and blue lit up every window on the street. 2 cruisers pulled in hard, tires squealing slightly as they braked. Officers moved in fast, weapons ready, posture tense. But they didn't need to guess who was who. Mark was waiting on the porch, calm as a sunrise, standing over the 2 men now zip-tied on the grass. His shirt was torn, his knuckles were scraped, but he hadn't lost a drop of control. The third one, neck tattoo, hadn't made it far. A neighbor had tackled him 2 houses down after seeing him sprint past, screaming something about wrong house, wrong guy. Mark handed them over one by one. "This one's Joe Green," he said, pointing to Beard. "He's wanted in 2 counties for fraud and impersonation, last seen running a phony water inspection racket in Amarillo." He turned to the second man, muscle guy, slick hair. "Tom Royce, former mall security. Fired for extortion, harassment, and pulling a taser on a teenager over a skateboard." The officers exchanged a look. "Wait, Green and Royce?" one muttered. "No way. These 2 have been on our radar for weeks." "They've been hitting neighborhoods like this one," the other officer said, lowering his weapon now, pretending to be HOA compliance, knocking on doors, threatening fines, confiscating property. "We've had complaints, but no one could ID them. No plates, no names. Vanished every time." "Well," Mark said, brushing dust off his shirt, "they picked the wrong damn house tonight." The silence that followed was filled with the hum of idling engines, the click of real cuffs locking into place, and the stunned quiet of officers realizing the man in front of them hadn't just protected his home, he'd handed them a case tied in a bow. Mark looked out over the street, then back at the mess of fake uniforms, badges made from laminated printer paper, and holsters bought off eBay. It was over, and Justice had walked out the front door in jeans and a torn t-shirt. Mark gave his statement with steady breath and shaking hands, not from fear, from rage. The kind that didn't shout, the kind that didn't explode, the kind that lived in clenched teeth, tight fists, and the weight behind every word. He stood in the police station's small interview room, pale fluorescent lights humming overhead, his knuckles still raw, his shirt still streaked with dust and sweat. Across the table sat two uniformed officers and one detective with a notepad, their pens moving, but their eyes locked on him. They could have kicked in any door, Mark said quietly, his voice hoarse from the inside out. Any family, any kid. He paused, forcing the next words through the brick wall of his throat. They didn't care who was behind it. They weren't checking addresses. They weren't asking questions. They came in ready to terrorize someone, and tonight, that someone was my son. No one interrupted. The room had the silence of shared understanding. No corrections, no clarifications. Just gravity. Mark sat back, his jaw flexing. He reached for the water bottle on the table but didn't drink, just held it. Something to stop his hands from trembling, not with panic, but with fury restrained by habit and years of training. They weren't HOA, one of the officers confirmed, not even close. He opened a folder and laid it on the table, flipping through printouts. Blown-up photos of fake IDs, costume-level badges, business cards with made-up departments, and phony phone numbers that all rang to disconnected lines. No credentials, no legal standing, uniforms printed online, and the codes they shouted about, pulled straight from a public PDF and edited to look official. We cross-referenced everything. Total fabrication. Mark stared at the pages but didn't need to read them. He already knew. He'd known the moment that door blew inward. He rubbed a thumb across the edge of the bottle cap. If I hadn't been a cop, he said almost to himself, they'd have walked. No arrests, no investigation, just another code violation swept under the rug. Another family too scared to fight back. He looked up. No badge, no backup, and they still thought they could get away with it. The room stayed quiet. Mark stood, slowly, with purpose. Get them off the streets, he said. Don't just charge them with impersonation. Hit them with everything. Criminal trespass, assault, endangering a minor. Wire fraud if they sent one text under that fake title. Don't let them spin this like it was just some misunderstanding. This was a targeted scam built to intimidate people who don't know the law. His voice didn't waver once, but his fingers crushed the plastic bottle just enough for it to hiss. Outside the room, the station hummed with life. Phones ringing, radios crackling, officers moving from desk to desk. But inside that small space, time felt still. Eventually, one of the officers nodded. You got it, O'Brien. We'll bury them in charges. Mark nodded once, then turned to leave. His boots echoed softly against the tile. In the hallway, Robbie sat on a bench, arms crossed, legs swinging slightly like a kid who hadn't fully processed everything, but was trying. His hair was messy, his shirt too big, and his eyes were still rimmed in red. Mark stopped in front of him, unsure what to say, but Robbie broke the silence first. Dad? Mark looked down, bracing himself. That was kinda awesome. Mark blinked. Then slowly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not a laugh, not a smile, but something close. A moment of light through the haze. He sat beside his son, their shoulders touching, both staring at the wall across from them. Maybe it wasn't over, but for the first time tonight, it felt like they'd won something back. Within a month, the story had gone national. It started as a quiet murmur, first on neighborhood forums, then on local evening news. But it didn't take long before the footage hit the internet, and from there, the fire spread fast. Every outlet wanted a piece. Headlines screamed, fake HOA thugs caught on camera, cop fights back, home invasion in disguise, and neighborhood hero stops HOA scam ring. The video from Mark's hallway camera was everywhere. It showed the door bursting open, the chaotic entry, the shouting, the unprovoked aggression. It showed Robbie pushed against the wall, his terrified face frozen in one frame that circulated like a punch to the gut. And then it showed Mark, calm, contained, stepping into frame and flipping the script with a badge and a takedown so clean it became internet legend. News anchors broke it down like a football replay. Former cops analyzed it on cable. Civil rights attorneys weighed in on the broader implications. Social media dubbed him the cop who didn't flinch. But for Mark, it wasn't about fame. It was about the court date. He didn't want cameras. He wanted convictions. And on a clear morning in a packed courtroom, he got them. The gallery was full. Press, neighbors, law enforcement, even families from other districts who'd suspected something was off but never had proof. Mark sat at the front, his suit plain, his posture steady. Next to him, Robbie wore a collared shirt and dress shoes he didn't like, fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve until his dad placed a steady hand on his arm. At the bench, the prosecutor adjusted the mic and looked straight ahead. "Your Honor, members of the court," she began, "today we bring forward not just a case, but a warning. These defendants used fear as a weapon. They wore uniforms they didn't earn, carried weapons they weren't authorized to hold, and entered homes where no law had invited them." She turned slightly, eyes resting on Mark. "It is only because of the calm courage of one man, a man who kept his judgment intact even as his son was shoved to the wall, even as his home was violated, that we stand here today with 7 formal charges: home invasion, assault on a minor, impersonation of a public official, fraud, unlawful possession of a weapon, tampering with medical records, and conspiracy to commit extortion." There was a brief silence. Then, unexpectedly, the crowd began to applaud. The judge allowed it. For once, the breach in decorum felt like justice breathing. Mark didn't turn to look at the room. He just stared straight ahead, jaw tight, eyes forward. But under the table, he felt Robbie's hand slide into his. He squeezed it gently. The camera crews outside swarmed the steps when court recessed. Reporters shouted questions, thrust microphones forward, hoping for a quote. But Mark walked past them without a word, his son still at his side. It wasn't about attention. It was about making sure those men never walked into another home again. The DA called later that evening to say the trial would proceed with full weight. Federal agencies were now reviewing similar cases across multiple counties, all connected to the same scam ring. What Mark had exposed wasn't isolated. It was systemic. That night, over takeout in their quiet living room, Robbie finally spoke up. "Dad," he said, voice soft, "I know you didn't want to be on the news or whatever, but I'm glad people saw what happened. I'm glad they know." Mark looked at him, really looked. For the first time since that night, his son's face was clear of fear. He nodded once. "So am I." The defense made their move like it was part of a chess game they thought they could still win. Midway through the trial, after the prosecution had laid out every charge, every frame of security footage, every damning line from the transcripts, the defense attorney rose from his seat with all the confidence of a man clinging to the last page in his playbook. He straightened his tie, approached the bench, and began. "Your Honor, we contend that Detective O'Brien, while acting in what he believed was defense of his home, may have crossed the line into excessive force. At the time of the incident, he was off duty, in civilian clothing, not clearly identifying himself as a law enforcement officer. The defendants were, by his own admission, not armed with drawn weapons, and he engaged them physically without formal arrest protocol. We argue that this action, though emotionally understandable, constitutes use of force by a private citizen." The courtroom tensed. There it was, the twist. The attempt to shift blame, blur roles, rewrite what everyone had seen with their own eyes. Mark didn't react. He sat still, back straight, eyes forward. He didn't flinch when the attorney gestured toward him. He didn't break when the defense tried to paint him as impulsive. He let it all happen, because he knew what was coming. Before the prosecutor could object, the judge leaned forward, eyebrows low, voice firm. "Counselor," he said, interrupting smoothly but with unmistakable finality. "Let me stop you right there." The attorney froze. "This court recognizes Detective Mark O'Brien as an active duty law enforcement officer in good standing, trained in de-escalation, authorized to use appropriate force when a threat presents itself. What occurred that night was not a bar fight or a neighborhood dispute. It was an armed home invasion by 3 men impersonating public officials with the intent to intimidate, extort, and harm. He paused just long enough for the words to land. The fact that Detective O'Brien was off duty is irrelevant. His home was invaded, his child was assaulted, his response was restrained, calculated, and lawful. The courtroom didn't cheer, but the silence after the judge spoke said more than applause ever could. The prosecution resumed, and this time they brought the rest of the neighborhood with them. One by one, residents took the stand, some nervous, others furious, all of them ready. An elderly woman testified that the defendants had shown up at her door, flashing a fake compliance order and threatening to tow her car unless she paid a fine on the spot. A young couple described how they were told their dog would be forcibly removed for barking unless they signed over $300 in cash. One man choked up as he explained how the fake officers threatened to call immigration enforcement on his wife, despite the fact that she was born in Michigan. None of the stories were identical, but they all carried the same rhythm: threats, lies, uniforms that weren't real, badges bought online, and fear. The pattern was undeniable. Mark watched from the front row, arms crossed, jaw tight. Robbie sat beside him again, older now, not in years, but in something deeper. The boy who'd once wept in a hallway now sat motionless, taking it all in. The defendants, once smug and unbothered, now sat hunched behind their lawyers. Their faces had changed. The cockiness had drained out. Their suits looked too big, their shoulders too small. They weren't predators anymore, just men waiting for a sentence. And on that day, in that room, justice didn't shout. It stood up, walked in, and spoke with clarity. The sentence was clear. 32 years split between the 3 of them. No plea deals, no sympathy. Just justice, finally formalized. As Mark stepped out of the courtroom, a bailiff handed him a folded note. "From the tall one," he muttered. Mark opened it and read the messy handwriting. "You didn't just catch us. You stopped what was supposed to be the future of robbery." Mark crushed the note in his hand without expression and dropped it in the nearest trash can. There was nothing else to say. That night, he didn't talk to the press or return calls. He went home. The living room looked the same, but the air was different. No weight, no tension, just quiet. He dropped onto the same old couch. Robbie joined him, flopping into his usual corner, feet up. The TV flickered, volume low. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Mark broke the silence. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't need to fire a gun to win." Robbie grinned. "Yeah, but it would have been way cooler if you had." Mark laughed. It was the first real laugh in weeks. No cameras, no pressure. Just a father and son, finally at peace. Outside, the world moved on. But in this house, there was stillness, safety. It had taken all of him to reclaim it. The scars were still there, in Robbie's hesitation, in the reinforced locks, in the sound Mark made when something slammed unexpectedly. But so was the strength. He hadn't just protected his home, he'd protected the entire neighborhood. The scam had been bigger than one house, bigger than one city. But it stopped here, because one man didn't flinch. One man stood between a lie and the people it meant to crush. Justice didn't come in sirens and speeches. It came in quiet choices, in control when violence would have felt easier, in knowing when to act and when to wait. That night, Mark sat back on his couch, looked over at his son, and felt something he hadn't felt since before the door was kicked in. Safe. And as Robbie leaned his head on his shoulder, Mark closed his eyes and let it settle in. Justice hadn't just arrived. It had come wearing jeans, tired eyes, and the badge of a real cop.